I think so. This program is brought to you in part through a grant from Humanities Kansas. Humanities Kansas connects Kansans with stories, ideas, and each other to strengthen our communities. Additional funding has been provided by Richard Porter and Porter Cattle Company, and by SEK Co-op, the Nature Conservancy in Kansas, and these family-owned ranching operations based in Greenwood County, Kansas.
It's an oasis on the prairie. Around 85% of Greenwood County is prairie. These ranchers know the value of the grasslands in Greenwood County and across the Flint Hills, and they want to preserve it. People claim that it's the most endangered ecosystem in the world. You know, we hear a lot about the Amazon rainforest and how endangered it is, but if you look at the numbers, tallgrass prairie is more endangered than even the Amazon rainforest because it's originally spanned from eastern Kansas all the way up into Iowa, Illinois, down into Missouri. So it was this large span of tallgrass prairie. Farming practices, urban areas, you know, chipped away at that tallgrass prairie, and now 4% of that remains, and nearly 90% of that remains right here in the Flint Hills area. And so this area is really important for tallgrass prairie. Tall grasses like big bluestem, Indian grass, switchgrass, side oats grama, those are species structurally that grow tall. And so these tallgrass species produce a lot of forage for livestock.
I have helped ship cattle, yearling cattle, who gain weight extremely rapidly, eating nothing but grass, bluestem grass. I have helped ship cattle that gained almost 4 pounds a day, eating nothing but grass.
The foremost authority on cattle culture in the Flint Hills of Kansas for many years, Jim Hoy grew up herding cattle. We spoke with him just a few weeks before he passed on in February of 2025. He filled us in on the practice of bringing cattle into Greenwood County from places like Texas.
I know that the first Texas cattle I'm aware of that were brought in to Greenwood County, 1868. Abilene as a cow town opens in 1867. 1 year later, there's a bunch of cattle being driven up from Texas. They get into southern Butler County. They split the herd. Half of them go to market in Abilene. Half are taken over to Fall River in Greenwood County to pasture there until the next year. So I know that as early as 1868, Texas cattle are being brought into the Flint Hills for pasturing.
By 1868, local settlers were already raising cattle in Greenwood County, grazing them out on the open range. They were concerned that the cattle coming up from the south were bringing disease with them, as was reported in the Eureka Herald.
August 21st, 1868. Mrs. Hitchcock, residing a few miles south of here, has lost within a few days 7 fine cattle. Several others have cattle sick and likely to die. The disease was communicated by a few Texas cattle supposed to have strayed near our southern border.
They called it Texas fever, a disease that often proved fatal. It was quite alarming to local residents. By the fall of 1868, people began to get more organized in their opposition. The Eureka Herald published notice of a grand rally focusing on the subject of Texas cattle.
At a meeting of the citizens of Eureka and vicinity, remarks were made by several persons present showing the necessity of preventing any and all Texas cattle from being driven into and through the county, there being no alternative but to keep such stock out altogether or surrender the country to them.
The country was not surrendered to the cattle from Texas, but neither were they kept out. As railroads were constructed throughout the region, beginning in the 1870s, the long trail drives eventually gave way to shipment by rail, a means of transport that lasted for several decades.
When I was a kid, the cattle all came up from Texas in trains. They'd come up in mid-April, throughout April, and they'd come up by the railroad car. Bunches of them, Santa Fe, Missouri Pacific, and bring carloads and carloads of those 2-year-old Texas steers. And some of them were sick, some of them were just in terrible shape, but by the time they had got out to the grass and could eat a little grass, they would gain their health quickly and gain weight exceedingly quickly.
Although the nutrient-rich grasses had the ability to help travel-stressed cattle bounce back quickly, concerns about the introduction of disease persisted. As the Leavenworth Times reported in May of 1892, a new protective association was formed in Greenwood County to represent the interests of local cattlemen. The following January, the Democratic Messenger of Eureka reported on a meeting of the Greenwood County Cattlemen's Association.
On motion of Captain Nye, a resolution was carried instructing the chairman to prepare a memorial setting forth the importance of our stock industry, our danger from infection, and petitioning His Excellency the Governor of Kansas for such recognition of our interest and claims as best the situation could afford.
At a meeting of the Cattlemen's Association in March of 1894, it commended the prompt action of a government inspector enforcing a quarantine of cattle coming up from what it called the infectious country to the south. And at its annual meeting the following March, as reported in the Topeka State Journal, it adopted resolutions instructing its officers and inspectors to keep a careful watch of cattle shipped in to see that they are not infected with Texas fever. This fever was spread by ticks, and eventually it became more commonplace for cattle to be immersed in a bath that killed the ticks and other parasites before the cattle were driven onward from the loading pens at the railroad. A former president of the Greenwood County Cattlemen's Association, Wayne Bailey, and his wife Marcia recall witnessing the action at the dipping vat by where they grew up near Matfield Green in a neighboring county.
Matfield was the only depot and stockyard that had a dipping vat. And so when them cattle come in, big old horns on them, and they'd tip them, then they'd run through the dipping vat to kill the scabies and stuff.
In fact, the old dipping vat is still over there at Matfield. It is still there.
The ramp started in there and then it just straight down where they had to go down. Then there's walkways on both sides where they had some forks, and they'd push them steers down and dunk them 3 times before they got to the other side. On the other side, it was a long slope, and where they'd swim over there, and then they'd get bottom, and then they'd just walk up out of it. Of course, we was little kids. We didn't get to do that. We'd been in the way anyhow.
The Baileys and a number of other families connected to the Greenwood County Cattlemen's Association shared their stories and insights with us as the organization approached the centennial of its annual celebration called Cattlemen's Day.
It's hard for me to believe this will be 100 years. for the Cattlemens, because we had floats in it for 4-H for, it seemed like years. And when the kids were little and we weren't involved in 4-H, we were always riding a horse in the parade in Eureka, you know. That was just the one weekend. Hey, that was Cattlemen's weekend. Everybody was gonna come to it.
We never had to work on Cattlemen's Day. So that's the level of importance. We never had to work on Cattlemen's Day.
Heather Huntington Fees grew up on a ranch near Eureka and moved back to Greenwood County to take up ranching again after working for a number of years as a development director for a community college. She used her grant writing skills to assist with fundraising for the renovation of the historic Greenwood Hotel in downtown Eureka.
And that is actually part of, the Greenwood Hotel is actually part of Cattlemen's history, because the building, the original building, was brick, built in 1883, had a grand opening. At that point in time, we were taking cattle to Kansas City because that's where the buyers were, was at the stockyards in Kansas City. Well, the cattle were so good in Greenwood County that the buyers would actually take the train and come to Greenwood County. So legacy says that $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion worth of cattle traded hands in the lobby of the Greenwood Hotel. And when they built onto the hotel or changed it, they didn't build on, but when they changed it, they did the stucco, which we kind of believe is they were replicating the plaza downtown in Kansas City with that Spanish Renaissance look. So when they did that, they decided to have a big party in 1926. So the party was such a great success, and at that point, the Cattlemen had dug in deep there. That was their spot, if you will. And so that's how Cattlemen's Day started, was in 1926 with that party they had at the Greenwood Hotel.
Although the Greenwood Hotel served as party central for the gathering, the dinner was served in the basement of a local church, featuring what was described as a big grass-fed steer. A special train brought guests in from Kansas City, including former presidents of the Kansas City Livestock Exchange and officials of the Santa Fe, Missouri Pacific, and Rock Island Railroads. The presence of the railway men reflected the importance they placed on the relationship they had with those who shipped cattle. There had been times in the past when the Cattlemen's Association had taken issue with the rates charged by the railroads and pressed them for more affordable service. But for several decades, cattle were brought in by rail and shipped out by rail, primarily to stockyards in Kansas City. Erlene Huntington, Heather's mother, recalls how her family shipped cattle to market.
My dad would feed out a load of fat cattle every year, and then they were put in a boxcar and they were sent to Kansas City. And if you shipped a load of cattle, someone could ride in the caboose at no charge. And so my dad's brother would go to the yards up there in Kansas City, and then of course there would be one of the commission men that would receive them and be the go-between and marketing them to whatever packer they were to go to. And then my uncle would get back home by catching a ride on some other freight train's caboose to get back to Eureka. But I'm thinking, wow, nobody ships cattle on a train anymore.
Trucks started taking over from trains in the 1950s and 60s. Large tractor-trailers now transport most of the cattle shipped in and out of the hills. In the spring, the first stop for cattle trucked in from places as far away as Florida is usually a large scale such as this one, operated by the Collins family in Hamilton, Kansas.
We put the scales in, I believe, in 2012. They're 80-foot truck scales. We weigh a lot of grass cattle in April, and then we weigh them out in July and August for a fee. We do it as a for-profit business, but It's helped us when we turn cattle out. We know what they weigh. We know what we have an exact figure, what they're gaining, how the cattle are doing, and so on.
Like many others in Greenwood County, the Collins Cattle Company functions as a custom grazing operation.
We buy some cattle of our own and background them in the wintertime, but the main focus of our operation is custom grazing. It's kind of a unique Flint Hills situation. We're the middleman between the cattle owner and the landowner. We rent the pasture, bring the cattle in for a set price. We take care of them, we take care of the pasture. We then ship the cattle at the end of the growing season, and that's kind of the gist of it.
Today, I'd say we are maybe running a few more of our cattle that we actually own.
Mike Collins, Glenn's father, grew up near Emporia, where his father was a veterinarian. He moved to Greenwood County in the late 1970s.
I was extremely fortunate to land here in an era that I guess you could say was kind of tough for agriculture. In the 80s, it was a really tough time and people were selling out and had a lot of debt and interest was high and all that stuff. Well, when you start out and don't have anything, you can't go down much farther. It was fairly easy to, well, I wouldn't say easy, but it was easier to obtain land to rent and to run when everybody was wanting out for any reason they could get. And so we were able to step in, and we didn't have the cattle to fill it that we owned, but we could find other people that could do it, and we just kept working and working on that. We gradually were fortunate enough to be able to purchase some, but most of our land was rented from absentee landowners that we were able to work with, and some of those we've had some fairly long-term relationships with.
This has been going on in this part of the Flint Hills for many years, and I hope to see it for many more. But to do that, you've got to take care of things. You've got to take care of the grass and do it right. In many cases, woody encroachment is all across Kansas. It's everywhere. But through fire and grazing, we try to take good care of things and keep the native tallgrass prairie the way it is.
One of the practices, the important practice that is being utilized in the Flint Hills, and especially here in Greenwood County, is prescribed burning. Burning sometimes stokes fear in people's lives because fire is bad. But here we have a burn culture that we recognize that burning is important to maintain that tallgrass prairie, make sure that the trees stay out, make sure other weeds don't come in and infest the prairie and take over. And so that prescribed burning is really a cultural event that you see here in early April. What it does is it regenerates, it takes all that old growth off. You know, that top growth is over the winter is dormant, it's dead, there's nothing there. And so if we take that off, then we can get sunlight to that ground, we can heat that ground up and get that flush of new growth. The growth point on that grass is just below that soil surface. And so that grass is naturally adapted to fire. Trees, on the other hand, are not, because their growth point is above the ground. And if we can take that fire, burn off the growth point of those trees, but not burn off the growth point of that grass, then we're gonna favor the grass versus the trees, and that's our goal. And it's fun to watch Greenwood County producers, you know, because if you're not familiar with prescribed burning or familiar with burning at all, you know, coming in spring and watching them conduct a prescribed burn, it is truly amazing because they have skill. They have an incredible amount of skill to be able to take acres and acres of land and light a fire safely and conduct that prescribed burn. And the folks here in Greenwood County with this burn culture have the experience to conduct a safe prescribed burn.
I think Dad and I are both the burning is one of the most important things we do for maintaining our grasslands, but it's a dreaded time of year, unfortunately, for us, and the fact that it's just, there's so much to do in such a little bit of time, and there's so many risks involved, and we want to make sure that we do it safely. We're watching the weather. The new aspects that we used to not think about is, we're looking at what even not just the local highway, whether the smoke's going across or keeping the fire off the neighbors. We're also looking, is that smoke going to hit Wichita, or is it going to hit Topeka? And so just so many factors.
Here in the Flint Hills and in the grasslands when we burn, we don't want to have people suffer because of us, but we want everybody to understand that this is an important tool that we have out here on the prairie to maintain a prairie, because if we don't, then we're going to have trees like cedar trees come in, and you look at the pollen amount of eastern red cedar, that's significant as well. When people get allergies in this early spring, likely it's from cedar pollen blowing up from Oklahoma that has a significant infestation of eastern red cedar.
Referred to as the Green Glacier, the invasion of cedar trees and other woody vegetation will overtake the grasslands unless ranchers continue to use tools such as prescribed burning to keep it in check. Even though he finds it somewhat stressful, Dilts Lindemood was well aware he'd have to deal with it when he decided to continue his family's ranching tradition, a decision he made early on before he had any thought about becoming a banker as well.
My granddad owned 40 acres right here, and when he got old, him and his wife moved to town, and my dad bought the 40 acres and he added to it, but I'm basically the fourth generation on this original 40 acres.
Brance Boone took over as president of the Greenwood County Cattlemen's Association in the spring of 2025, succeeding Jared Seeley in that role. He pointed to the increasing cost of land as a perennial problem for farmers and ranchers.
I would say that was one of our major issues, and I'm not pointing at absentee landowners as an issue, but I was going to say it causes a lot of issues, and I don't foresee that issue improving.
Throughout history, the association has played multiple roles. The association dealt with tick fever and turned a lot of herds around or redirected them to keep them out of the county.
And I said, hey Matt, I have this great idea. I would really like to bring a busload of people out to the sticks and show them agriculture, and I'd really like to do it with you all. Would you be willing to do that with us? And he was like, yeah, I think I would. That was like mid-February, I think, when we did that, and we hosted our first day at the ranch like April the 15th.
Then that kind of evolved into more of a social media type of education, because she started posting about Day at the Ranch and then started doing it more as an education, more on a weekly basis. And then she involved myself and 2 other women at the time, and we started posting weekly, taking turns. I would take a week, Jamie would take a week, and so on, to just try to get some of those myths dispelled and educate people a little bit more about our lifestyle.
There are the Cattlewomen, or the cowbells, is how it kind of actually started way back when. My mother-in-law and some of her friends, I think that's how they were known, was the cowbells, and it was mostly a social gathering. But now we've taken it to another level where they are getting into the schools and taking the kids on field trips, like to the sale barn or whatever it might be, to help them, understand. Here in Greenwood County, our primary business is producing beef.
There were 3 generations of us at that last spring meeting of the Cattlemen's in 2014, which was right before Dad would have passed away. So that was pretty cool. So someday, Reed moves back, well, maybe he'll be a Cattlemen's member, and we can do that all again. And that's the other, I guess we're trying to build and expand to bring our next generation back.
There's no doubt about it. Ag, you spend a lot of time by yourself on a horse, in a pickup, on a tractor, whatever the case may be, doing certain tasks, but then the fun times are when everybody comes together and gets a big job done.
You want to get everything set up so that, they've got a chance. And that's what my folks did. They made good decisions and the right choices and set this up for us to follow into, and I hope that we can do the same.
I think if you'd have asked me the day I graduated high school if I'd ever moved back here, I'd have told you you were crazy and that I wasn't ever coming back. I didn't go that far away, but I got far enough away that by the time I was married and we were ready to settle down and have kids, there wasn't really ever any question that I didn't want to do it anywhere else but here.
So we took a month to build out the space we wanted it, and then we opened on Cattlemen's Day in 2022, and that was our first day in our market there. But after we'd been there about a year, we knew we wanted a bigger space, and then we opened at our new building in end of March of 2025, and it's, again, we were blown away by the community support.
We haven't had a good year since. See how cool.
And we're just lucky that we was involved with the change. We're just lucky that we was where we are and still are.
And still able to do things. It may take us twice as long. It may take both of us to do a one-man job, but at the end of the day, we can say, no, we got it done.